What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Friday, September 3rd.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 14 game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Alek Manoah with a 14% pitching advantage over the Oakland Athletics. Alek Manoah, he pitches his best ball versus righty batters, only giving up a .485 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 6 righties here tonight. Now, he doesn't have much of a sample size versus the Athletics. The Athletics are 0 for 2 in his last 2 pitches, so we'll have to see how that goes. But Alek Manoah is $10,000 FanDuel salary and $900 less on DraftKings. Projected at 30.7 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 3.15. His record is 5-2 on the season, pitching an average of 91 pitches per game, averaging 33 fantasy points per game. He scored 41, 34, and -3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Alek Manoah here versus the Oakland Athletics. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Jared Walsh with a 35% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Glenn Otto. Jared Walsh is batting 35% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.021 OPS versus righties, and Glenn Otto is giving up a .833 OPS versus lefties. So Jared Walsh is $3,100 FanDuel salary. He's $800 more on DraftKings. Projected at 14.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 26, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jared Walsh here versus Glenn Otto. Okay, now CJ Cron is in a great spot here tonight, but he's pretty expensive. So I'm going to save a little bit of salary here and go with Will Smith, batting against Anthony DeSclafani. Will Smith is batting 23% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .986 OPS versus righties, and Anthony DeSclafani, he's giving up a .698 OPS versus righties. But I like this pick because Will Smith is 6 for 10, batting .600 with a 2.067 OPS versus DeSclafani. He has 2 home runs and a triple. And Will Smith is $3,700 FanDuel salary, only $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 22, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Will Smith here versus Anthony DeSclafani. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Ketel Marte with a 68% batting advantage over Tyler Anderson. Ketel Marte is batting 41% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.170 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Anderson, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .973 OPS versus switch hitters. I like this pick because Ketel Marte is 9 for 17, batting a .529 batting average and a 1.718 OPS versus Anderson. He's $4,200 FanDuel salary, 1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 15, 0, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ketel Marte here versus Tyler Anderson. I also like Jonathan India with a 53% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Tyler Alexander. Jonathan India is batting 11% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .906 OPS versus lefties. And Tyler Alexander, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 42% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .913 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Alexander yet, and Jonathan India is 3,600 FanDuel salary and 900 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 0, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jonathan India here versus Tyler Alexander.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to DraftDashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the position optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new player trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Donaldson with a 23% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Michael Wacha. Josh Donaldson is batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .853 OPS versus righties. And Michael Wacha, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 10% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .980 OPS versus righties. Josh Donaldson is 2 for 4, batting .500 with a 1.417 OPS versus Wacha. He's 3,200 FanDuel salary, only 600 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 3, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Michael Wacha. I also like Joey Wendell with a 45% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Randy Dobnak. Joey Wendell is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .806 OPS versus righties. And Randy Dobnak, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 23% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .991 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Dobnak yet, but Joey Wendell is only 2,900 FanDuel salary, 1,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 6, and 3 fantasy points. 3, 6, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Joey Wendell here versus Randy Dobnak. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? I like Adalberto Mondesi with a 45% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Dallas Keuchel. Adalberto Mondesi is batting 27% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.200 OPS versus lefties. And Dallas Keuchel, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 17% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .750 OPS versus switch hitters. Mondesi is 2 for 7, batting a .286 batting average and a .715 OPS versus Keuchel. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 16 fantasy points per game on the season. He's been on fire, scoring 31, 18, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Adalberto Mondesi here versus Dallas Keuchel. Now I also like Kyle Farmer with a 75% batting advantage over the low salary pitcher Tyler Alexander. Kyle Farmer is batting 34% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .878 OPS versus lefties. And Tyler Alexander, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .913 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Alexander yet. The Kyle Farmer is only $2,900 FanDuel salary and only $300 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, projected at 9.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 25, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Kyle Farmer here versus Tyler Alexander. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Austin Meadows with a 68% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Randy Dobnak. Austin Meadows, he bats 45% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .827 OPS versus righties. And Randy Dobnak, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 23% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .991 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Dobnak yet, and Austin Meadows is $3,400 FanDuel salary, $1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 7, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Austin Meadows here versus Randy Dobnak. Okay, now a few guys that are in good spots: Connor Joe, Akil Baddoo, and Andrew McCutchen. Those are a few guys you can save a little bit of salary on. The value plays seem to be a little hard to come by on this slate, but one of my favorite plays of the slate, I like Michael Brantley with a 47% batting advantage over Jake Arrieta. Michael Brantley is batting 35% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .935 OPS versus righties. And Jake Arrieta, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 12% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .961 OPS versus lefties. I like this pick because Michael Brantley is 4 for 8, batting .500 with a 1.136 OPS versus Arrieta. And he's only $3,200 FanDuel salary, $800 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Jake Arrieta.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to DraftDashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.